Burned at Broken Bow. The Cheyenne Girl Who Returned Fire with Fire, Nebraska Territory, 1876. Ahioka was a young Cheyenne girl, barely 12 years old, living in a small village near what would later be called Broken Bow in the wide-open plains of Nebraska Territory. Her world was a vast sea of grass, dotted with trees and crossed by rivers that glimmered in the sunlight. Life for her and her people followed the rhythm of nature. She would wake up with the birds, help her mother gather wild berries and herbs, and run across the plains with her younger brother, Cheyenne, playing games that taught them balance, courage, and the ways of their ancestors. The village was small but lively. Teepees rose like quiet mountains from the flat land, their skins painted with colors that told stories of bravery, family, and the animals that the Cheyenne revered. Men and women worked side by side. The men hunted buffalo and deer, while the women prepared food, sewed hides, and taught the children the songs and stories of their people. Ahioka loved listening to the elders as they sat around the fire in the evenings, their voices low and steady, weaving stories about the stars, the spirits of the land, and the lessons of ancestors who had walked the plains long before. She would sit cross-legged near the fire, eyes wide, imagining herself living each story as if it were happening to her. Ahioka was different from many children her age. She was curious in a way that sometimes got her into trouble. She wanted to see how things worked, why the river curved the way it did, and how the wind carried seeds across the fields. Her mother would often smile at her endless questions, saying, "You will grow strong, Ahioka, because your mind is always moving." Her father, a quiet and thoughtful man, taught her the names of the birds and the tracks of animals, showing her which plants were safe to eat and which could heal cuts and fevers. He also told her that to live on the plains one had to pay attention, listen carefully, and respect the land. Ahioka absorbed every word, feeling proud to learn the secrets that would help her people survive. Life was not without its challenges. The Cheyenne were aware that the world around them was changing. More settlers were moving into the Nebraska Territory. Ahioka had seen their wagons along the trails and sometimes glimpsed their homes in the distance. The children whispered about the newcomers, some of whom carried strange tools and strange ways. Adults spoke more seriously, warning that these changes could bring trouble. Still, Ahioka felt safe in the village. She had her family, her friends, and the land she knew so well. She trusted that the wisdom of her people would guide them through whatever was coming. The seasons marked the passage of time. In spring, Ahioka and the other children would chase butterflies and watch the young animals take their first steps. She loved the warm summer days when she could run barefoot across the soft grass, the sun shining on her face. Autumn brought the hunt, and she would watch the men as they prepared to follow the buffalo herds, feeling a thrill of admiration at their skill and courage. Winter, though harsh, was also magical. The snow would blanket the plains, and the village would huddle together around fires. Ahioka loved the stories told in the long nights, stories of heroes and spirits, of ancestors who had faced hard times but had survived through wisdom and courage. Despite being young, Ahioka often thought about her role in the world. She liked to help wherever she could, carrying small bundles of firewood, helping her mother with food, or watching her brothers so their parents could focus on tasks that required more skill. She noticed things that others sometimes overlooked, the way a hawk circled in the sky, the footprints of an animal near the river, or the clouds that signaled coming rain. Her keen attention made her feel important, as though she was learning the language of the land itself. Her best friend, Lilu, was the same age as Ahioka, and together they explored the edges of the village. They played games pretending to be great warriors and wise leaders, imagining themselves protecting their families from dangers that existed mostly in stories. But the games were also practice. The elders often said that children who learn to move quietly, watch closely, and think ahead would be the ones who could help their people in times of need. Ahioka and Lilu laughed and ran, but there was always a thread of seriousness beneath their play, a respect for the lessons passed down from those who came before. One morning, Ahioka woke before sunrise. She could hear the soft murmur of the river and the quiet rustling of the wind through the tall grass. She stepped outside her teepee and saw the world bathed in pink and gold. Everything felt peaceful. Birds sang, and small animals scurried through the undergrowth. It was the kind of morning that reminded her why she loved the plains so deeply. She thought about her parents, her brother, her friends, and the elders whose wisdom she cherished. She felt connected to all of it, a small but important part of a living, breathing world. At the same time, she was beginning to sense that this peace might not last forever. Whispers had reached the village about strangers moving through the territory, and although no immediate danger had arrived, Ayoka's father spoke quietly to her one evening about paying attention, being careful, and learning everything she could. "The world changes," he said, "and we must be ready. But the land, the river, and the wind will always teach those who watch." Ahioka nodded, understanding more than she could express. She felt a mix of excitement and unease. She wanted to grow strong, to learn all the skills her people valued, but she also felt the weight of responsibility beginning to settle on her small shoulders. By late summer, Ahioka had learned more about her own strength than she had ever imagined. She could run across the plains without tiring, spot distant animals, and move silently like the foxes she watched. Her curiosity had turned into skill, and skill into confidence. Yet, she remained humble, knowing that life on the plains required respect, patience, and care. She enjoyed teaching younger children simple games, sharing stories she had learned, and helping her family whenever possible. She was becoming a bridge between her people's past and what might come in the future, a quiet observer of life, learning lessons that would soon be tested in ways she could never predict. The village continued its rhythm. Fires burned in the evenings, children played, and adults worked. The plains stretched endlessly in every direction, full of beauty, life, and mystery. Ahioka often stood on a small rise outside the village, looking at the horizon and imagining the stories that the land held. She thought of her ancestors and wondered if they had faced the same feelings, the same curiosity, and the same desire to protect those they loved. She felt connected to them, as if the stories told around the fires were not just tales, but threads linking the past, present, and future. In these quiet moments, Ahioka dreamed of being brave, wise, and strong. She did not yet know what challenges would come, but she felt ready to face them. Her family's love, her people's teachings, and the knowledge of the land were all part of her, shaping her into someone capable of facing more than just ordinary days. And as the sun set behind the hills, painting the plains with deep oranges and purples, Ahioka promised herself that she would honor her family, her tribe, and the world around her, no matter what the future held. The summer had been warm and full of life, but Ahioka began to notice small changes around the village. Travelers moved along distant trails, and sometimes strangers' wagons could be seen on the horizon. The adults spoke quietly about these newcomers, not out of fear, but out of concern for the future. Ahioka did not yet fully understand all that this meant, but she felt a shift in the air, a tension that made her listen more closely to the stories and advice of the elders. One morning, the village awoke to a strange sight. Smoke rose far off in the distance, curling into the sky above the trees. Ahioka and Lilu, her closest friend, ran to the top of a small hill to get a better view. The smoke was too far to tell what caused it, but it left a bitter taste in her mouth and made her heart beat faster. They ran back to the village to tell the elders, their voices full of worry. The elders quickly gathered the villagers. They spoke in calm but firm tones, reminding everyone that the land had always been full of challenges and that the Cheyenne had survived by watching, learning, and helping each other. Ahioka's father placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes serious but reassuring. "Stay close to your family," he said. "Observe, but do not panic. Remember what you have learned." The words were meant to comfort, but Ahioka felt a mix of fear and excitement. The stories she had listened to around the fires were coming alive in a new way. Over the next few days, the village remained alert. Hunters moved carefully, observing the plains and keeping watch for unusual signs. Ahioka helped her mother with daily chores, but her mind wandered constantly to the distant smoke. Dungeons. She practiced moving quietly, hiding behind bushes and trees while she watched the horizon, imagining herself protecting her family and her people. Even though she was young, she began to feel the weight of responsibility pressing on her small shoulders. One afternoon, Ahioka's father took her and a few other children to a hidden area near the river. He wanted to teach them more about the land and the ways they could use it to stay safe. "The plains are our home," he said, "but they can also teach us lessons about careful steps and clever thinking. You must always pay attention to what is around you, even when it seems quiet." He showed them how to follow tracks, how to tell the difference between different animal prints, and how to notice changes in the wind or clouds that might signal approaching weather or travelers. Ahioka soaked up every lesson, feeling both pride and a growing sense of purpose. As the days passed, more signs of strangers moving through the land appeared. The children whispered about wagons, horses, and people with unfamiliar clothing. Ahioka noticed how her parents and other adults spoke in hushed tones, exchanging information with gestures and short words. Even though the adults tried to remain calm, Ahioka could sense a quiet tension. She realized that the world she had known was beginning to change, and that she and her people might soon face tests unlike anything they had experienced before. One evening, as the sun sank low, painting the sky with shades of gold and crimson, Ahioka walked to the edge of the village with Lilu. They watched the horizon, imagining stories of heroes and warriors who had faced challenges long ago. Lilu spoke softly. "Do you think we will ever have to be brave like the people in the stories?" Ahioka looked at her friend and nodded slowly. "I think. Maybe we will," she said. "And if that day comes, we must be ready. We must remember what we have learned." The two girls stood silently for a while, listening to the wind through the grass and the distant call of birds returning to their nests. The tension in the village grew slowly but steadily. People began to take precautions. Tipis were checked and repaired, food was stored carefully, and small groups of villagers would quietly scout the surrounding plains. Ahioka's father taught her to recognize signs of unusual activity, how to move quietly, and how to stay aware of her surroundings. Each lesson was a reminder that life on the plains required not just strength, but thoughtfulness, attention, and courage. Ahioka began to see herself as part of a larger picture, a small piece in a living, breathing world that demanded respect and understanding. One morning, Ahioka awoke to a sound that startled her. A group of birds had taken flight suddenly, their wings beating rapidly as if warning of something. She ran to the edge of the village and saw distant movement among the trees. Her heart raced. She ran back to tell her father, who quickly gathered the adults. They quietly explained to the children that not every change in the wind or movement in the distance meant danger, but it was important to always observe and learn. Ahioka nodded, her mind alert and ready. She felt a mixture of fear and determination, a feeling that she was beginning to understand more about courage than she ever had before. Over the next few weeks, the village experienced minor disruptions. Travelers passed nearby, leaving traces on the ground, footprints, wagon tracks, and broken branches. Adults guided the children in interpreting these signs, teaching them patience and careful observation. Ahioka felt herself growing stronger in ways that were not physical but mental and emotional. She was learning how to stay calm, think clearly, and act wisely in uncertain situations. Despite the tension, life continued in the village. Ahioka and her friends played near the river, gathered berries, and practiced skills their parents had taught them. She learned to weave, to track animals, and to prepare simple medicines from plants. Every skill made her feel more capable and more connected to her family and her people. The elders often reminded the children that knowledge and observation were just as important as bravery, and Ahioka listened closely, determined to carry these lessons into whatever challenges lay ahead. One day, Ahioka's mother called her to help with a special task. A family of birds had built a nest near the village, and one of the eggs had fallen. Ahioka carefully carried it back to her mother, who taught her how to care for it. "Every life matters," her mother said softly. "Even the smallest, even the most fragile. Respect and care for all, and the land will teach you in return." Ahioka felt a deep sense of responsibility and pride. She realized that bravery was not only about facing danger, but also about caring for others and understanding the importance of life in all its forms. As summer turned to early autumn, the distant signs of change became clearer. The adults discussed how to prepare the village, teaching children like Ahioka and Lilu about safety, patience, and careful observation. Ahioka began to feel ready, confident in the knowledge she had gained, and in the support of her family. She knew that challenges might come, but she also understood that courage came in many forms, not just in facing what was frightening, but in being wise, patient, and caring. By the time the leaves started to change color, Ahioka had grown in ways that were both visible and invisible. She moved with confidence across the plains, observed the world with careful attention, and felt a deep connection to her family, her tribe, and the land itself. She could sense the changes coming on the horizon, and while the future was uncertain, she felt ready to face it with patience, intelligence, and courage. Ahioka often thought of the stories told around the fires in the long winter nights. She realized that the lessons of the past about respect, bravery, wisdom, and care were not just stories, but guides for her own life. She was beginning to understand her place in the world, a small but important part of the Cheyenne people, ready to observe, learn, and act when the time came. And as the sun set behind the distant hills, painting the sky with gentle colors, Ahioka felt a mixture of hope and determination, knowing that her life was intertwined with her family, her people, and the land she loved so dearly. Ahioka had grown stronger and wiser over the summer, learning to move quietly, watch closely, and think ahead. But as the leaves began to turn gold and red, a feeling in the air told her that the time for learning might soon meet the time for action. The adults spoke less of stories now and more of preparedness, reminding everyone that the plains could be both beautiful and unpredictable. Ahioka listened carefully to every word, her eyes wide with attention, her heart steady despite the tension. One morning she woke to a strange quiet. The usual sounds of birds and rustling grass seemed softer, almost as if the world itself were holding its breath. Ahioka ran to the top of a small hill near the village, hoping to see far across the plains. Her sharp eyes spotted unusual tracks near the trees, footprints that did not belong to the people of her village. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with focus. She ran back to her father, who was checking the edges of the village. "Father," she said, pointing to the tracks, "these are not from our people. Someone has passed this way." Her father knelt, examining the prints carefully. "You are right, Ahioka," he said. "And you saw them first. That is important. You are learning well." He straightened, looking around at the other adults, and nodded. The adults quietly moved through the village, checking boundaries and discussing plans in low voices. Ahioka watched, absorbing everything. She realized that bravery was not just about facing danger head-on. It was also about noticing, thinking, and helping others act wisely. That day, Ahioka's father called a small group of children, including Ahioka and Lilu, aside. They were to learn how to help the village in ways that were safe but meaningful. Sometimes, he explained, even children can be very helpful if they watch carefully and think carefully. You will not fight. You will observe, report, and assist. That is a kind of courage, too. He taught them how to move silently through the grass, how to follow tracks without leaving new ones, and how to signal adults if something unusual happened. Ahioka was quick to learn. She noticed how shadows shifted in the afternoon sun, how the wind carried sound differently across the plains, and how distant movements could tell stories if one paid attention. She felt proud, knowing that even as a child she could play a part in keeping her people safe. Over the next few days, Ahioka put these lessons into practice. She would wake early, before the sun touched the horizon, and move quietly to the edge of the village. From there, she observed the plains, her eyes scanning for anything unusual. She began keeping track of animals, travelers, and the paths they took, sharing her observations with her father. Her notes were small and simple, written on scraps of bark or in her mind, but they were accurate and detailed. Adults began to notice how her sharp eyes and careful thinking were helping the village prepare. One afternoon, Ahioka noticed smoke rising far off in the distance. Unlike the casual fires that were common during hunting or cooking, this smoke was thin and carried a strange color. She ran to her father immediately. He took one look and nodded to some of the adults, who moved quietly to investigate. Ahioka felt a surge of responsibility. Her quick notice had given the adults time to act, and she realized that her careful attention could make a real difference. That evening, as the sun set in fiery shades of orange and purple, Ahioka sat near the fire with Lilu. "Do you think we are ready for what is coming?" Lilu asked softly, her voice trembling. Ahioka thought carefully. "I don't know what will happen," she said, "but I know we have learned a lot. We know the land. We know each other. That is how we will be ready, by watching, thinking, and helping." She looked into the flames, seeing herself in the stories her father had told, clever, careful, and brave, even in uncertain times. Days passed, and Ahioka continued her careful observations. She became skilled at noticing small changes in the environment, a broken branch, a faint footprint, or the direction of the wind. She learned to use the shapes of clouds to predict rain and the movement of animals to understand patterns in the land. Every skill made her feel more capable and more confident. She realized that courage was not only about strength, but about knowledge, patience, and awareness. One morning, the adults asked Ahioka and a few other children to help with an important task. A small supply of food and water needed to be moved to a safer part of the village, where it could be protected in case of unexpected visitors. Ahioka carried her bundle carefully, avoiding making noise, and placed it exactly where instructed. Her father watched from a distance, nodding in approval. "Even small acts like this can help our people survive," he said later. "Your careful hands and eyes matter." Ahioka felt a deep pride. She understood that action came in many forms, not just fighting or running, but helping, observing, and being responsible. Over the next few weeks, Ahioka's confidence grew. She noticed patterns in the strangers' movements and shared her observations with the adults. Sometimes her suggestions were small, like placing a marker near a tree to guide someone safely, or observing unusual tracks, but they were always thoughtful and helpful. The adults began to trust her judgment, and Ahioka felt a growing sense of responsibility. She was learning that courage and clever thinking could protect her people just as much as physical strength. One evening, as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Ahioka climbed to the top of her favorite hill. She looked over the plains, imagining the challenges ahead. Her heart was calm but alert. She knew that soon her skills would be tested in ways she had only imagined. Yet she also felt a quiet confidence. She had learned to move silently, to watch carefully, and to think quickly. Most importantly, she had learned that she could help her people, even in small ways, by paying attention and acting wisely. Ahioka also began to notice her own feelings in a new way. She felt both excitement and worry. Excitement because she was learning to take part in the life of her people in ways she had never before imagined. Worry because the world was changing, and she knew that challenges were coming. She realized that these feelings could exist together, and that courage meant moving forward even when fear was present. One day, she was called to assist in watching the edges of the village while adults discussed plans. From her hidden vantage point behind a tall clump of grass, she observed the plains with careful eyes. She saw birds flying in unusual directions, the wind carrying sounds differently, and the distant glint of sunlight on something moving slowly across the horizon. She ran to her father to report what she had noticed. He nodded and said quietly, "You have learned well, Ahioka. Your eyes and mind are helping us all." This moment filled her with a quiet pride. She understood that her role was important, and that even as a child she could make a difference. She also understood that courage was not about acting recklessly, but about paying attention, thinking carefully, and using knowledge to protect others. As the sun sank behind the distant hills, Ahioka walked back to the village with Lilu. The sky glowed with warm colors, and the wind carried the scent of the changing season. Lilu spoke softly. "I think we are learning to be brave like the stories we hear." Ahioka smiled and nodded. "Yes," she said, "bravery is not only about facing danger. It is about learning, helping, and paying attention. We will be ready when the time comes." By the time the first cool winds of autumn blew across the plains, Ahioka had grown in ways that were both visible and invisible. She moved with confidence, observed with care, and understood her place in the world in a new way. She felt connected to her family, her tribe, and the land itself. And while the future was uncertain, she knew that she had learned the most important lessons: courage, wisdom, patience, and the power of careful action. As night fell over the village, Ahioka lay in her teepee, listening to the distant calls of animals and the soft rustle of the wind. She thought of the stories her elders had told, of heroes and clever leaders who had guided their people through difficult times. She realized that she was becoming a small part of that tradition, someone who could observe, act, and help others, even when the world was changing in ways she could not yet fully understand. The first cool winds of autumn had begun to sweep across the plains, and the village moved with careful alertness. Ahioka sensed the change in the air. Even though no immediate danger had reached them, there was a weight of anticipation that made every sound, every shadow, and every movement on the horizon seem significant. She had learned to notice things that others might overlook: the subtle shift in a bird's flight, the unusual arrangement of footprints near the river, and even the faint glimmer of sunlight on something moving far away. These small details filled her with a sense of responsibility and determination. One morning, Ahioka was helping her mother gather herbs near the edge of the village when she noticed something strange. A line of footprints had appeared in the soft earth, winding toward the forest beyond the plains. They were not the familiar tracks of her people or the animals she knew. Her pulse quickened, but she did not panic. Instead, she carefully observed the tracks, noting the spacing and direction, and memorized their pattern. Then she ran to find her father. "Father," she said, her voice steady, "there are footprints near the trees. They are not ours. Someone has passed this way." Her father knelt, studying the tracks with a quiet seriousness. "You are right, Ahioka," he said, his eyes thoughtful. "And you noticed them first. That is very important. We must watch carefully. Can you help us track them?" Ahioka nodded, feeling a surge of purpose. She had been learning for months how to move quietly, observe details, and report what she saw. Now, for the first time, she was being asked to use her skills in a real situation. She felt nervous, but ready. Her father led her to a small clearing where they could follow the tracks without being seen. As they moved slowly, Ahioka paid attention to everything: the way the grass bent under the wind, the movement of animals, and even the color of the soil. She noticed patterns that helped her understand how many people had passed and in which direction they had gone. She whispered these observations to her father, who nodded in approval. "You are learning well, Ahioka," he said quietly. "Keep your mind and eyes open. This is how we keep our village safe." Over the next few hours, Ahioka followed the tracks with her father and a small group of adults. She remained careful, moving silently, sometimes stopping for long moments to observe the surroundings. Every sound, whether the call of a bird or the rustle of leaves, seemed important. She realized that patience and focus could be just as valuable as speed or strength. Her small heart felt proud. She was not just a child playing games anymore. She was an active part of protecting her people. By late afternoon, the group had followed the tracks to a place where they could no longer see the footprints clearly. They returned to the village, and Ahioka helped share what she had learned. She described the patterns, the direction of movement, and the small signs that indicated how many people had passed. The adults listened carefully, impressed by her sharp mind and careful observation. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "You have done well today," he said. "You have helped us all." That evening, as the village gathered near the fire, Ahioka felt a mix of pride and reflection. She thought about what she had learned. Courage was not only about facing danger, but also about being prepared, observing carefully, and helping others with knowledge. Even a small act of attention could make a big difference. She realized that being brave could take many forms, and that her skills were valuable in ways she had not imagined. The following days were filled with careful preparation. Adults taught the children about signs in the environment, how to move quietly, and how to help without drawing attention. Ahioka practiced these lessons diligently. She became skilled at noticing small changes: a broken branch, an unusual shadow, or the faint sound of movement in the distance. Each discovery made her feel more capable and more connected to the land. She began to understand that true courage came from understanding the world and using knowledge wisely. One morning, the adults asked Ahioka to help with another important task. A supply of food needed to be moved to a safer location where it could be protected if the village faced unexpected visitors. Ahioka carefully carried her bundle, making sure not to make noise or leave traces that could give away the path. She moved with precision, thinking ahead, and placed the supplies exactly where instructed. Her father watched from a distance, a proud smile on his face. "Even small actions can make a great difference," he said later. "You are learning well." As the week continued, The village experienced subtle signs of approaching strangers. The adults explained these signs to the children: footprints in unusual places, changes in animal behavior, and distant sounds carried by the wind. Ahioka noticed each one and reported them with accuracy. Her observations allowed the adults to take careful precautions, keeping the village safe while maintaining calm. She realized that her role, though small, was meaningful. Courage, she understood, included paying attention, thinking clearly, and helping others prepare. One afternoon, while observing the plains from her favorite hill, Ahioka noticed smoke rising again in the distance. This time it was thinner and more controlled than before. She ran to her father and described what she saw. Adults quickly discussed what to do, using her observations to plan their next steps. Ahioka felt a deep sense of pride. Her careful attention had given the village an advantage, allowing them to act thoughtfully rather than react in panic. She began to understand that her skills could influence the safety and well-being of her people. That evening, as the sky turned soft shades of pink and gold, Ahioka walked with Lilu to the edge of the village. They spoke quietly about the lessons they had learned and the ways they had helped. "I feel like we are becoming part of the stories we hear," Lilu said softly. "Like the heroes in the fireside tales." Ahioka nodded. "Yes," she said, "but our courage is different. It is careful, patient, and thoughtful. That is how we help our people." By the time the sun sank behind the distant hills, Ahioka had begun to feel a quiet readiness. She had learned how to watch, listen, and act with intelligence. She had practiced patience, observation, and careful movement. And she had begun to understand that courage was not just about facing danger, but about helping others through careful action. One evening, as the village settled under a sky full of stars, Ahioka reflected on her journey. She thought about the lessons her parents and elders had taught her, the skills she had practiced, and the small ways she had helped protect the village. She realized that she was becoming someone her people could rely on, not because of strength alone, but because of wisdom, care, and courage. The wind carried the sound of distant birds and rustling grass, and Ahioka listened carefully. She imagined the challenges that might come and felt ready. She knew she had grown in ways that mattered, in thoughtfulness, awareness, and the ability to act wisely. She understood that the first steps toward protecting her people were not about fighting or running, but about preparation, attention, and courage in small, meaningful acts. As she lay down in her teepee that night, Ahioka thought about the stories her elders told by the fire, of clever leaders and brave heroes. She realized that she was now part of those stories, in her own quiet way. Her skills, her patience, and her careful observations were all part of a tradition of courage and care, passed from one generation to the next. And as the stars shone above, she felt a sense of purpose and determination that would guide her in the days to come. Ahioka knew that challenges were still ahead. She did not yet know what would happen next, but she was ready to use her knowledge and courage to help her family and her village. She had learned that every small action, every careful observation, and every thoughtful decision could make a difference. And with that understanding, she felt prepared to face whatever came next, confident that she could protect those she loved through intelligence, patience, and bravery. Autumn deepened across the plains, and the village moved with a quiet energy, aware that the seasons were changing and that challenges could come at any time. Ahioka felt a sense of calm readiness. She had learned to watch carefully, act wisely, and help her people in ways that mattered. Every small observation, every careful movement, and every lesson she had practiced now felt like a thread weaving her more closely into the life of the village. She understood that her actions mattered, not because they were dramatic or bold in the usual sense, but because they were thoughtful, careful, and guided by knowledge. One morning, Ahioka noticed something unusual near the edge of the forest. A few animals were moving differently than usual, their tracks crossing in strange patterns. The wind shifted, carrying scents and sounds in ways that hinted at unfamiliar movement nearby. Without hesitation, Ahioka ran to her father, describing everything she had noticed in detail. Her words were calm, precise, and careful, showing not fear, but careful attention. Her father listened, nodded, and called a few adults to quietly investigate. Once again, Ahioka's careful observation helped the village act before uncertainty could become worry. That afternoon, the village held a quiet meeting near the fire. Adults discussed plans, shared observations, and reminded the children about the importance of attentiveness and cooperation. Ahioka sat near Lilu, feeling proud of how far she had come. She had learned to notice patterns, predict movements, and help guide others. Her small acts of courage, watching carefully, reporting what she saw, and following instructions with precision, had begun to have a real impact. She realized that bravery could take many forms, and hers was growing stronger with each careful choice. As days passed, Ahioka began helping in more ways. She assisted her mother with storing food, helped her father keep watch along the edges of the village, and taught younger children simple lessons about observing the land. She became a bridge between the elders and the youngest members of the tribe, sharing knowledge and helping others learn what she had been taught. Her confidence grew, and she realized that leadership could begin at any age, as long as one acted with care, thoughtfulness, and respect. One crisp morning, Ahioka was asked to accompany her father to a hill overlooking the plains. From there, they could see far across the landscape. Her father explained that sometimes, even small signs could tell a big story. "Ahioka," he said, "you have learned well. Now you will help us understand the land in ways that keep everyone safe. Your eyes and your mind are valuable." Ahioka nodded, her heart steady. She felt the importance of her role, not as a child simply following orders, but as someone whose careful observation could protect her people. They watched quietly for hours. Ahioka noticed footprints, changes in animal behavior, and the movement of clouds across the sky. She pointed out each observation to her father, explaining what she thought it might mean. He smiled quietly, impressed by her growing skill. "You are learning to see what others might miss," he said. "That is courage, and it is important for our people." Ahioka felt a deep sense of pride. She realized that courage was not always loud or dramatic. It could be quiet, patient, and wise. Weeks passed, and Ahioka's role in the village became more significant. She was no longer just a child learning from elders. She was a helper, a guide, and a source of careful attention. Her actions had prevented mistakes and kept the village prepared for changes in the land and in the movements of people and animals. She had learned that every small choice mattered, and that courage included knowledge, patience, and the willingness to act when needed. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with soft reds and golds, Ahioka climbed to her favorite hill with Lilu. They watched the distant horizon, the wind brushing their faces. "Do you think we have made a difference?" Lilu asked softly. Ahioka smiled. "Yes," she said. "We have helped by paying attention, learning, and helping others. That is how we protect our people. That is how we are brave." Lilu nodded, her eyes bright with understanding. The two girls sat quietly, feeling connected to the land, their families, and the traditions of their people. As the season continued to change, Ahioka's contributions became more recognized. Elders spoke of her careful observation, her thoughtful actions, and her willingness to help without complaint. Other children began to look up to her, learning from the example she set. Ahioka realized that leadership and courage were not only about the strongest or the oldest, but about those who paid attention, acted carefully, and thought about the well-being of others. She felt proud to carry forward the traditions of her people in a meaningful way. One morning, a small group of travelers passed near the village. Adults had already prepared, but Ayoka was asked to observe and report any unusual signs. She watched carefully from a hidden spot, noting the travelers' movements and describing them in detail. Her father praised her afterward, saying, "Your careful observation has allowed us to act wisely. You are learning to protect your people with thought, not just with strength. That is very important." Ahioka felt a warm sense of pride. She realized that courage could take the form of careful attention and thoughtful action. In the evenings, Ahioka continued to learn from the elders, listening to stories of those who had guided their people through difficult times. She understood that these stories were more than just tales. They were lessons in courage, wisdom, and care. She thought about how she had used what she had learned to help her village, and how she would continue to grow and serve her people in the future. By late autumn, Ayoka had become an integral part of the village. Her careful observations had helped prevent problems, her actions had assisted the adults in planning, and her example had inspired other children to be mindful and thoughtful. She understood that her courage and skill were not about being the strongest, but about using knowledge, patience, and care to make a real difference. One night, as the sky filled with stars, Ayoka sat outside her teepee and reflected on the months that had passed. She remembered the lessons of her parents and elders, the small challenges she had faced, and the ways she had helped her people. She realized that her growth was part of a larger story, one that connected her to generations of her ancestors, to her family, and to the land itself. She felt a quiet pride and a sense of purpose. Even as the plains grew colder and the winds blew stronger, Ayoka remained calm and alert. She knew that challenges might come again, but she felt ready. She understood that courage could be quiet, thoughtful, and careful. She understood that even the smallest actions could have a big impact. And she knew that by using her skills, knowledge, and careful observation, she could continue to help her family and her village in meaningful ways. Ahioka also realized that her story was just beginning. The lessons she had learned, the skills she had practiced, and the courage she had discovered in herself would guide her for the rest of her life. She understood that being brave did not always mean facing danger directly, but sometimes meant learning, observing, helping others, and acting wisely. Her heart was filled with hope, confidence, and a quiet determination to continue serving her people and honoring the traditions of her ancestors. As the first snowflakes of the season began to fall gently across the plains, Ayoka watched them settle on the grass and trees. She thought about the months that had passed, the learning, the careful observations, and the first real actions she had taken. She felt grateful for her family, her friends, and the elders who had guided her. She felt proud of herself and hopeful for the future. And in that quiet, peaceful moment, she understood that courage, wisdom, and care would always be a part of her, shaping her path and helping her face whatever came next. Ahioka's journey had taught her that true bravery was not only about facing challenges directly, but about preparing, observing, and helping others in ways that mattered. She had grown from a curious child into someone capable of thoughtful action, wise decisions, and meaningful contribution. Her people had noticed her growth, and even in small ways, her actions had helped keep the village safe and connected. And as the plains stretched endlessly beneath the stars, Ahioka felt a sense of belonging, purpose, and a deep connection to her family, her people, and the land she loved so dearly.